The Sioux Nation stands among the oldest and most influential Native American tribes in North America, with roots stretching back 2,000 to 3,000 years. At the height of their power, their lands spanned thousands of square miles, making them a significant force in U.S. history. The ancestral Sioux likely originated in the central Mississippi Valley before migrating to Minnesota. By 800 AD, they settled in the dense forests of central Minnesota and northwestern Wisconsin. Around 1300 AD, they evolved into a structured society known as the Seven Council Fires, consisting of 7 distinct bands based on family ties, language, and geography. Today, many Sioux communities trace their lineage to these original bands while maintaining tribal autonomy. The 3 largest divisions of the Sioux Nation are the Lakota, Nakota, and Dakota. While some historians consider the Nakota part of the Dakota, all 3 names mean friend or ally in their respective dialects, reflecting their deep-rooted alliances and shared heritage. The Sioux Nation stands among the oldest and most influential Native American tribes in North America, with roots stretching back 2,000 to 3,000 years. At the height of their power, their lands spanned thousands of square miles, making them a significant force in U.S. history. The ancestral Sioux likely originated in the central Mississippi Valley before migrating to Minnesota. By 800 AD, they settled in the dense forests of central Minnesota and northwestern Wisconsin. Around 1300 AD, they evolved into a structured society known as the Seven Council Fires, consisting of 7 distinct bands based on family ties, language, and geography. Today, many Sioux communities trace their lineage to these original bands while maintaining tribal autonomy. The 3 largest divisions of the Sioux Nation are the Lakota, Nakota, and Dakota. While some historians consider the Nakota part of the Dakota, all 3 names mean friend or ally in their respective dialects, reflecting their deep-rooted alliances and shared heritage. The Sioux hold a profound spiritual connection with nature, seeing all living beings, plants, animals, spirits, and humans, as relatives. They believe in the Great Spirit, the creator and unifier of all existence. Central to their spiritual beliefs is the Whitefalo Calf Woman, a sacred messenger who brought the 7 sacred rites and the sacred pipe, teaching harmony and respect. These 7 ceremonies include the Purification Lodge, Crying for Vision, the Sun Dance, Making of Relatives, the Female Puberty Ceremony, Throwing of the Ball, and Soul Keeping. Before the 1600s, the Dakota Sioux thrived around Lake Superior, sustaining themselves by harvesting wild rice, hunting deer and buffalo, and fishing from canoes. However, warfare with the Ojibwa in the 1700s forced them into southern and western Minnesota, where the Lakota and Nakota had established agricultural communities. With the arrival of horses, the Lakota and Nakota transitioned to a nomadic lifestyle focused on buffalo hunting. They lived in teepees, crafted clothing from animal hides, and traded buffalo products for agricultural goods from neighboring tribes. Raids on rival tribes such as the Mandan, Arikara, Hidatsa, and Pawnee were common, driving these groups to ally with the U.S. military against the Sioux. Sioux communities functioned as close-knit, extended families guided by appointed leaders who fostered identity and belonging. Men were responsible for hunting, warfare, tool-making, and trade, while women managed household tasks, including processing hides, cooking, and sewing. They also set up and dismantled camps during migrations. Older children tended horses and gathered resources, while elders passed down knowledge and cared for infants. In Lakota society, polygamy was accepted, with men of high status often having multiple wives, reflecting their social and economic standing. In the 1600s, the Dakota Sioux established trade relations with French merchants as part of the competitive North American fur trade. The French sought alliances with native tribes like the Ojibwe, Potawatomi, and Ottawa to gain an edge over the English. The first documented encounter between the Sioux and the French occurred in the winter of 1659 to 1660, when explorers Radisson and Gros-Soleil reached present-day Wisconsin. Initially, relations between the Sioux and the Ojibwe were peaceful. In 1679, they formalized an alliance at Fond du Lac, Minnesota, agreeing that the Ojibwe would trade fur goods with the Sioux in exchange for permission to move west toward the Mississippi River. For 57 years, this alliance flourished. The 2 tribes hunted, traded, intermarried, and shared religious practices. However, tensions emerged as the Dakota resented the Ojibwe's growing trade ties with their enemies, the Cree and Assiniboine. French traders further complicated the situation by manipulating both sides to maintain control of the fur trade. By the 1720s, rising tensions erupted into open conflict. The Sioux, no longer reliant on Ojibwe trade, opposed the Ojibwe's continued expansion into their lands. Despite being outsiders at first, the Ojibwe, having lived there for nearly 3 generations, were determined to defend the territory they now called home. The Sioux-Ojibwe War, which began in 1736, evolved into one of the longest-running conflicts in North American history. The war front extended from central Wisconsin through Minnesota to the Red River of the North, disrupting travel and fur trade routes. This shift benefited the Cree and Ojibwe while blocking European traders from accessing the Sioux market. As the Ojibwe expanded southward, they seized key waterways from Grand Portage to Rainy Lake, establishing a central town at Rainy Lake. Their push towards Sioux settlements at Leech, Red, and Sandy Lakes gradually secured control over much of northern Minnesota within 40 years. One of the conflict's major battles occurred in 1770 at the Dalles of the St. Croix. According to Métis historian William Whipple Warren, the Meskwaki tribe, enemies of the Ojibwe, launched the initial attack, later joined by the Sioux. Despite an early advantage, Sioux forces faced fierce Ojibwe reinforcements. Both sides endured heavy losses, with the Meskwaki suffering the most casualties. The Ojibwe emerged victorious, establishing a new boundary near the Snake River's mouth. As a result, the Dakota Sioux were forced southward, losing significant lands around Leech Lake and Mille Lacs. As the Lakota and Nakota Sioux moved westward into the Great Plains, they adopted many customs from neighboring Plains tribes, reshaping their culture around horses and the fur trade. Meanwhile, the Dakota Sioux retained woodland traditions, adapting to life along forested rivers. By 1803, the 3 main Sioux divisions, Dakota, Nakota, and Lakota, had settled into distinct environments while maintaining cultural unity through shared traditions and intertribal ties. Determined to defend their lands after facing displacement by the Ojibwe, the Sioux fiercely resisted further incursions as settlers pushed westward beyond the Mississippi River. The California Gold Rush of 1849 triggered a surge of travelers through their territories, prompting growing concern among the Sioux over U.S. government efforts to establish the Bozeman Trail and other migration routes through their sovereign lands. In 1851, the Fort Laramie Treaty was signed, allowing settlers safe passage along the Oregon Trail through Sioux lands. However, tensions escalated after an incident in 1854 when a cow from a Mormon caravan wandered into a Sioux camp. Fearing the Sioux, the Mormons reported the cow stolen to the army at Fort Laramie. Lieutenant John Grattan led troops to the Sioux village, demanding the arrest of the alleged thief. When the Sioux denied the charges, Grattan ordered cannons to be fired, killing Chief Conquering Bear, a respected Sioux leader. In response, the Sioux launched a counterattack, killing Grattan's entire detachment. Retaliation came in September 1855 when General William S. Harney led 600 soldiers to destroy a Sioux village at Blue Water Creek, killing 85 people and capturing 70 women and children, marking a deepening cycle of violence. By August 1862, the Sioux, led by Chief Little Crow, launched raids on settlements and trading posts in Minnesota, driven by broken treaties and starvation. They attacked Fort Ridgely but were repelled by howitzer fire, losing up to 100 warriors. The raids continued, prompting General Henry H. Sibley to lead 1,500 troops against the Sioux. Despite early Sioux victories, their forces were overwhelmed by artillery at the Battle of Wood Lake. Many Sioux fled to the Dakota Territory or Canada, while others were captured. In a grim turn of events, President Abraham Lincoln ordered the mass execution of 38 Dakota Sioux warriors. On December 26, 1862, in Mankato, Minnesota, the largest mass execution in U.S. history took place, symbolizing the harsh consequences of the conflict. After the Civil War, the discovery of the Bozeman Trail by John Bozeman opened a new route to Montana's goldfields but cut through the Sioux and Cheyenne's hunting grounds. In response, the Sioux, joined by the Northern Cheyenne and Arapaho, launched raids against settlers and military patrols. In 1866, Red Cloud and other chiefs met with U.S. officials at Fort Laramie to negotiate. While some chiefs signed treaties, Red Cloud walked away, determined to fight. Meanwhile, the U.S. Army built Forts Reno, Phil Kearny, and C.F. Smith along the trail. That same year, Crazy Horse orchestrated a successful ambush by tricking soldiers sent to gather wood. Captain William Fetterman led a relief force but fell into a trap, resulting in the complete annihilation of his 80-man detachment. The U.S. military increased reinforcements, equipping soldiers with breech-loading rifles. Despite heavy casualties on both sides, the conflict continued. With the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad, the government abandoned the Bozeman Trail forts. In 1868, Red Cloud signed the Fort Laramie Treaty after securing the U.S. Army's withdrawal, and the Sioux burned the abandoned forts. However, the buffalo, the lifeblood of the Plains tribes, was rapidly disappearing. The destruction of the buffalo and continuous U.S. expansion violated the Fort Laramie Treaty, sparking new conflicts. Tensions peaked in 1874 when gold was discovered in the sacred Black Hills, drawing settlers into Sioux lands. Refusing to sell the Black Hills, the Sioux, led by Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse, prepared for war. In 1876, the U.S. military launched a three-pronged campaign. General George Crook advanced from the south, Colonel John Gibbon from the west, and General Alfred Terry with Colonel George Custer from the east. In March, the Sioux and Cheyenne won a significant victory at Powder River. On June 17th, Crazy Horse led 700 warriors in a fierce attack against Crook's 1,000-man force, forcing his retreat. The tribes regrouped at a large encampment along the Little Bighorn River, numbering 7,000 people, including 1,800 warriors. Despite warnings, Custer launched an attack on June 25th without waiting for reinforcements. His plan backfired disastrously. The Sioux and Cheyenne, led by Sitting Bull, Crazy Horse, and Chief Gall, annihilated Custer's entire 200-man detachment, achieving their last great victory against the U.S. Army. The aftermath of the wars proved devastating for the Sioux and Cheyenne. Following a series of crushing defeats, Sitting Bull and his band sought refuge in Canada. In 1877, Crazy Horse surrendered but was killed while resisting imprisonment. Sitting Bull eventually returned in 1881, surrendering at Fort Buford. He was relocated to the Standing Rock Agency, where he was killed in 1890 while resisting arrest. The final chapter of the wars unfolded in 1890 with the rise of the ghost dance movement, led by Paiute mystic Wovoka. He promised that performing the ghost dance would restore the old world. The buffalo would return, the dead would rise, and white settlers would be driven away. For many impoverished and desperate Native Americans confined to reservations, this spiritual movement offered hope. Believers thought that wearing ghost dance shirts would make them bulletproof. Alarmed by the growing movement, the U.S. government banned the ghost dance on Sioux reservations. Indian police were sent to arrest Sitting Bull, a vocal supporter of the movement. During the confrontation, Sitting Bull and 6 of his warriors were killed. Chief Bigfoot and his followers fled toward the Pine Ridge Agency, but were intercepted by the 7th Cavalry under Major S.M. Whitside. They were ordered to camp at Wounded Knee Creek. On December 29, 1890, while Bigfoot and other leaders were meeting with Army officers, a rifle accidentally discharged. Colonel James Forsyth, who had taken command, ordered the soldiers to open fire. Artillery bombarded the encampment, killing over 250 Sioux men, women, and children, including Chief Bigfoot. The massacre at Wounded Knee marked the tragic end of the Sioux' long struggle to defend their lands and way of life. Following the wars, the U.S. government imposed assimilation policies on native tribes, forcing children into government-run boarding schools. These schools aimed to kill the Indian to save the man, stripping native children of their cultural identities. They were given English names, dressed in Western clothing, had their hair cut, and were forbidden to speak their languages or practice their religions. Conditions at these schools were often harsh, with overcrowding, poor sanitation, and rampant disease. Many students attempted to escape, and some died due to neglect or abuse. A turning point came in 1934 with the Indian Reorganization Act, which ended land allotment, prohibited non-consensual land seizure, recognized tribal governments, and encouraged tribes to adopt written constitutions. This law aimed to reverse decades of forced assimilation by promoting native self-governance and resource management. However, federal policies in the 20th century continued to be a mix of both support and harm for Native communities. The civil rights movement inspired Native Americans to assert their rights, leading to the founding of the American Indian movement. Tensions over political control and accusations of corruption on reservations escalated, culminating in the Wounded Knee Siege on February 27, 1973. American Indian movement activists occupied Wounded Knee, South Dakota, protesting local government corruption and federal neglect of Native issues. The occupation lasted 71 days, during which American Indian movement activists faced an armed siege by federal agencies, including the FBI and U.S. Marshals. The standoff left 12 people wounded, including an FBI agent who was paralyzed. 2 Native activists were killed, and 2 went missing. Despite the violent outcome, the Wounded Knee Siege became a symbol of Native resistance and renewed the Sioux' fight for tribal sovereignty and self-determination. The Black Hills remain a powerful symbol of cultural and spiritual significance for the Sioux Nation. In 1980, after decades of legal battles, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that the federal government had illegally seized the Black Hills, awarding over $100 million in reparations to the tribes. However, the Sioux Nation, steadfast in its belief that the land was never for sale, rejected the settlement, which has since grown to over $1 billion due to interest. Today, the struggle for the Black Hills continues as a fight for justice and land restoration. The Sioux' unwavering stance has made the case a defining issue in Native American land rights history. As of the early 21st century, an estimated 170,000 people identify as Sioux, preserving their rich cultural heritage through ceremonies, language revitalization, and tribal governance. The legacy of resistance, resilience, and cultural pride continues to define the modern Sioux Nation.